the agenda for open that, and I get sedate.
Oh, that's fun.
So if nothing else, I don't know if it's worth sticking the correct link in the online chat.
Is there a correct link?
I don't know.
So I suspect that someone's been writing sedate notes into the MediaMan.
Sorry?
So this looks as if someone's been writing sedate notes into MediaMan.
Oh, maybe, I see. Oh, so maybe it is the right one.
Because the link had MediaMan in it.
Whoever takes notes should just leave them there in case, so they don't get lost.
Yeah.
That's kind of annoying.
Right, it does have media man in it, isn't it? Okay. Well, let you guys sort that one out.
So you can start off by writing a header across it. If you're looking for the sedate note, see the bottom of this page.
Yeah, exactly.
Note that the meeting started 1 minute ago.
Okay. A minute, I can't see you.
I think that's actually a template. The notes that are currently sitting on our note URL. Something strange, that's for sure.
If we can have.
So if you were just looking for a quiet place to read your mail, this might be the room for you. But if you're here for the MediaMan work group, welcome. So we have 1 hour, and we have a couple of slides to go through. Sorry. So standard stuff, note well is the same as always. If you can't read the small print, just look at the online pages. It's the same as in every working group. Meeting tips, same thing. Wear masks unless actively speaking at the microphone. So, resources. Today's agenda. Here's where our stuff comes in. So, first point, This is Media Man Working Group. Second point, do we have a volunteer for scribe? Graham, can I irritate you for scribing?
I can't even see what's going on at the moment.
Oh, yeah.
I'll help him out.
Yeah. Alexa and Graham will cooperate on sliding, on taking notes somehow. We have 3 drafts and 1 discussion item to go through. The top level, the haptics, the multiple suffixes, and the discussion on registration procedure. And all that is going to take less than 1 hour. Now, does anyone wish to bash the agenda?
What's agenda? I can only see it. I can't see it online.
It's on the screen
That's a whole lot.
Yeah, okay. But
and in the slides in the online deck.
slides, what's that? Sorry,
Yeah.
I don't know my way around the system, so sorry.
Yeah. So I think I also sent the agenda in text in the mailing lists, but I might have changed it after that without telling anyone.
Hopefully it's not on the mailing list.
So nobody wishes to bash the agenda, so we'll just go on. So for each draft on my list, I have 3 standard questions. One is who has read the draft. Second is who supports going to the working group last call at this time, and who thinks there are issues that should be resolved before the working group last call. If you raise your hand for both of those last 2, then I think you're somewhat confused. So those are kind of exclusive. The point of this exercise is to flesh out issues now, so that we actually get forward progress. I'd like this working group to finish, preferably soon. So Martin couldn't be here, either online or not, so I'll speak to that. Changes since last IETF. We now have a working group repo, or a working group Git organization, and it has a Git repository that contains the MediaMan top-level draft. There's a 0.1 version published. There's a few issues raised against it. And that's actually all the status there is. This is a status slide. So the issues that are on my list are criteria for registration. There's a proposal in the draft, which people might consider appropriate or not. It's we need to describe what the effect of having a top-level type is supposed to be. It would be nice if it actually had some resemblance to reality. If you strive for world peace by registering top-level types, you're in the wrong business. Should we have a IANA registry of the top-level types? Where should we put background justification info that is done by the top-level types? And I forget what this question was. Should we use should?
I was curious about the last one, and I actually had a quick look. I think Martin said is like, should we use should more than must in various places? It's not very specific.
Yeah, so that's kind of I can't find my repo at the moment. GitHub, there it is. Top level issues. So Martin's comment says that yes, it uses must, like this must be done in order to register a new level type. And that's kind of a subset of the criteria discussion where, yeah. So,
I have a new issue to raise, and I can comment on the should thing. You don't have to use the should type language just in order to be normative. You can say this is simply the way it is done. So it's up to you how you do it, but don't feel like that's the only way to get people to comport with whatever you want to say. And the other thing is that all three of the documents, I just went through them very quickly looking for a few things that I typically trip on when I'm looking at things that get to the ISG. None of them use BCP 14 properly, so the authors will need to fix that.
BCP 14.
14 is the keywords thing. So yeah. They all refer to 2119, and one of them makes up some of its own stuff. Can't do that. So
yeah. So that's an issue to raise.
Yep.
So I'll ask some quick questions. Criteria for registration. Or first question, who has read the draft? 5 out of 7 or something like that. I'm not. Yeah. And criteria for registration. And who thinks the current criteria are approximately right? I think so. Approximately. So we don't think it's obviously, I mean, Martin is not off into right field. He's more or less where we want to be, but of course there's always details. The effects, I think, that's wordsmithing. And Alexei?
Yeah, I wish the criteria was very crisp about, you just know and go through checklist and just decide, but it's not. And I think that's just real world with this sort of thing. We need to find out is there is enough interest or is documenting existing use and, all of these things. So.
Yeah, I think that's...
So basically I'm saying, yeah, I wish it was better, but it's the way it is, and that's probably good enough.
Yeah. So we'll take suggestions for making it better, but I think we'll do that on the list. Do we think there should be an IANA registry of top-level types?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
No? And care to elaborate?
Thank you.
The no has to elaborate, I think. Okay.
I'm not quite sure what problem is being solved here, but I'm hesitant to say too much because I'm not up to speed with the draft, but it seems that top-level types are sufficiently rare that the overhead of having to write a new RFC to create one doesn't seem to be that out of line.
Oh, I'm thinking that comes under criteria. I think an RFC is perfectly appropriate, but keeping a list of them might be a good thing.
So,
Alexei, let's say Murray was actually following protocol, so you should go first. Murray should go first.
Yeah. Being media type reviewer, actually, one of the things that trips me several times is it's quite, unless you know where to look, it's kind of hard to know where the model of media type is registered because it's very old RFC. It doesn't follow the new template. And there are a few things like this. So yes, maybe it can be just dealt with by adding references to RFC numbers on the media type page, and that might be sufficient. But I kind of think that it might be easier to just have a registry. And registration procedure is RFC required, which is, or whatever, which is already what we're, what we're doing anyway.
Okay, you convinced me. I withdraw my no.
Thank you. I think we have working group in the room consensus on wanting an IANA registry. And where to put background justification info, I kind of think that that might be moot if we keep the requirement for having an RFC published, because that's the place to put it. With the haptics being a good good example to follow. And the way I read the should be used should is really should be relaxed the requirements so that they're a little bit more sloppy. And I was hearing the opposite from usually, but Murray.
I'm going back one point to the background information. If we're going to do RFC required, which I think would be hard to justify doing anything less than that, it seems like that's going to take care of the second last bullet.
Yep. So let the notes show that we seem to be thinking that the answer is in the RFC. And I heard some comment on saying that we should make sure the requirements are as crisp as possible, which says that we shouldn't use should. But I think that comes down to a discussion of each individual criterion. So my current understanding is that this needs to be revised again. It's not ready for last call. And we should say thank you very much to Martin. And get kicking with commenting on the issues. We'll go to the next slide. And that was supposed to be a separate presentation, and Mr. Mutusami is asking to present.
Hi, Harold. Hi, everyone.
Ground screen.
Just a second.
I think I may have to stop presenting and stop share and ground screen and see if that works. Okay. You might have it's possible that you have it.
Yes, I do.
Takes a little while to start up.
Okay, let me see. Are you able to share see my screen, or do I have to do something?
You have to share.
Okay, I thought I was doing that. Give me a second.
I mean,
Okay,
Miteco seems to be thinking that you're not sharing.
Here we go. I was looking for the share window as opposed to the entire screen. I found it. Okay.
Ew.
Now I'm going to go into slideshow mode and ask the question again. Are you able to see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Yashwant Mutusami, and I'm going to give a quick update on the haptics internet draft. Just a quick rundown of what has happened since the last time I uploaded a version of the draft, which is version 01 back in May. There have been a lot of haptics related development in MPEG, which are quite relevant to what is happening here. The MPEG-I haptics phase 1 codec is now in CD ballot, which is the first of 3 rounds. There is a new working draft on the MPEG-I carriage of haptics data, and this is significant because it uses or defines and fleshes out the MIH1 haptic subtype to refer to the MPEG-I haptic streams. And in the MPEG-I scene description group, 2 haptics extensions have been approved for implementation, and there is a new working draft that specifies how haptics interplays with interactivity and user representations and so on. And I have done a scrub of Martin's draft and to see whether the haptics ID satisfies all the requirements as listed in the 2 sections. And the next few slides are going to be effectively kind of a Q&A on whether those requirements are being satisfied or not. So let's jump right into it. The first one, I'm not going to read through all of his criteria. You have that with you, just the blue parts, which are my answers to whether they are being satisfied or not. The intended status of this draft is indeed as standards track RFC, and I have received evidence of interest from 3 organizations so far. You might have seen the emails to the media types mailing list. They are from Tencent, Interdigital, and Razer. Interdigital is kind of hot off the presses. I just forwarded to the group just now. I wasn't sure if it's going to show up by itself. I don't think that there is any confusion here, because all subtypes that pertain to any formats pertaining to haptics or any of the sub modalities of haptics would fall under this top level type. So in my opinion, at least, there is zero scope for confusion. Moving on, I have 2 actual subtypes defined in this draft. As soon as this draft is approved, the registration of the actual types will be done and reflected in the final RFC document. But there are also a number of subtypes which I talk about in this deck, and we can look at that. And these are the haptics subtypes which are actually in use as we speak. AHAP is a format that represents all of the encoding used in our iOS devices right now, in over 1 billion mobile devices worldwide. OGG is a proprietary extension to the OGG format for haptics, done by Google. And IVS is a vendor-specific haptic format that we at Immersion are using, and many of our customers are using. Same goes for HAPT. In addition to this, there are a number of standards related haptic subtypes which are in flight in various stages of standardization, and a few of them are documented in section 2.6, but based on the last meeting in the month of October at MPEG, there are a few more which are worth mentioning, and you see them all here. The HMPEG is the phase 1 coding format, HGIF is the interchange format, MIH1, as I mentioned already, is a streaming format, and then the IEEE coding formats are actually in ballot. They are in the final IEEE SA ballot, and they have 1 vibrotactile and 2 kinesthetic coding formats, and the HENUM and the HAVC are the enumerated effects, or the A to V or audio to white coding formats. So there is a lot of subtypes which are in haptics, which are kind of waiting for the door to be opened, so to speak. Once that top level haptics type is approved, these can all be registered, and they will all live under the haptics top level type. And then, of course, as I mentioned already, Immersion has specified 2 subtypes that we have control over. And in the email from Razer, they have indicated strong interest in having 2 of their own subtypes be under the haptics top level type. the haps and the chaps. And I think the email from Razer actually provides an exemplar subtype registration. I will let you read through that email. It's on the list. And as I mentioned, the MPEG subtypes are there, which are on the previous slide. These will become part of the MPEG standard over the course of the next 12 to 18 months. And the IEEE subtypes are going to be used in the 5G tactile internet application space. A quick rundown to the section 2.2. There is no, there are no undefined top-level types currently in use. Of course, it is actively being discussed in this working group right now, so no issues there. All data for formats or subtypes under the haptics ID, they all pertain to the sense of touch, and they need to be under the proposed top-level type. And the key common feature of all of these subtypes is that they all require some kind of a haptic subsystem, such as low-level haptics APIs, which in turn will require hardware capabilities, such as one or more haptic actuators to actually do the rendering of the haptic media. So they do all share these common features and attributes. And the last one is that that these are all pertaining to the sense of touch in much the same way that audio and video top-level types pertain to the sense of hearing and with vision. And then common restrictions, applied. This is what I could think of. And I didn't quite understand the ask in this last criteria. This might be something that we discuss on the list. It seemed to be kind of more of stream of consciousness and wasn't as crisp as someone already had a comment, and I kind of felt this one was something that could do with a little bit of fine tuning. But in terms of what I could gather from this last criteria, my response is that files which contain just haptics without any audio and video will be directed to the appropriate haptic output device. And an example would be a haptic chair, such as the one from D-Box, or bodysuits, which are expecting haptics only files. And that's pretty much it. Any questions?
So Murray, first questioner.
Hi. This is much further along than the last time I looked at it, so thanks for that. You're running a checklist against the top-level document. That's great. I was going to wanted to make sure you were doing that. Section 1.1 is obsolete. You need to look at 8174. That's the new text that you need to use in that section.
Okay. Sorry. Are you now referring to specific sections in my draft?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to make sure where the references were from. Okay.
One thing that your two registrations in 4.3, two short corrections. As I see this a lot when I'm looking at media type registrations. You have required parameters none. It has to be NA. Otherwise, none is interpreted as there's a parameter called none that you need to describe. So just be
okay, got it.
They also, the templates, both of them are missing security considerations. There needs to be a reference to something to look at.
Okay.
Which brings me to your section 3, I think. Are the security considerations? You got 4 paragraphs here, so thank you for being thorough. Do those cover all haptics types or just the 2 you're registering?
No, they cover all haptics types.
Okay, I think that should be made crisp because this is going to be the document that I, as a media type reviewer, come to look for. Should I allow this haptics registration? This is all the guidance I'm going to come to. So I need to know if this stuff applies to these 2 haptics things or to all future haptics things. So just make that clear, please.
Okay. Great feedback. Thank you.
So thank you. And speaking as participant for a moment, I believe that the last slide was mostly text that was not responsive to the text from the top level draft. But I also believe that most of the text can be replaced with not applicable. So that's should be an easy edit. I'll file issues. By the way, do you have a repository that you want to move, or do you want to keep editing yourself?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
Uh,
Do you want to have a repository under the working group for the drafts where we can file issues and so on?
Sure. Yes, that would be great.
Good. We'll set that up.
Okay.
So my impression of this draft is that yes, we seem to be supportive of getting the haptics top level type registered, but there are some issues with the draft that need to be addressed, and we should pursue this further. Daryl.
Yes. This may be my ignorance. In 431, you have encoding considerations that says text/binary. Is that meaning sometimes it will be text, sometimes it will be binary?
I have to look at what you're referring to. It's been a while. If you can give me just a minute here, I can pull it up. Okay, just to answer your question, there could be some haptics files like the descriptive formats like AHAP, which has basically an extension of the JSON standard. So that, I think, is what is being referred to. That would be the text part, where they provide a specification of the haptic effect in JSON format. In other cases, the haptic file is just a binary signal.
So the top level description is to say that some types might be text and some text-like, and some might be binary.
Yeah,
Each individual registration needs to specify that. Alexei?
the encoding consideration in template is a choice of one of 4 fields, 4 values: 7-bit, 11-bit, 8-bit, binary, or framed. So it's actually, the information might be useful, but probably not in this field. I'll have a look.
Good. Daryl?
Yeah, the particular case is for the IVS subtype. So I get for the overall top level type, it may be text or binary. For the IVS, I'm presuming that's one or the other, whatever IVS is.
IVS is an XML based format. It has a binary equivalent called IVT, but when you create this file, it's actually in XML form.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, I think we're at the end of the allotted time for this one. And I believe that we have 2 reasons why this cannot be last call at this time. One is that there are some issues that need to be fixed, and the other one is that it depends on the top level draft that is not finished. But I think we're all very happy to see this go be substantially closer to ready than it was last time we looked at it. Thank you.
Don't let that last point hold it up, by the way. We can just make this a misref. It's fine to move that.
The thing is that if we change the criterion top level, yeah.
Okay.
So let's go back to the share slides. And see where we are. We're now to suffixes.
Hi, Harald. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Wonderful. Hi, my name's Manu Sporny. I'm currently editing the suffixes document. Just to remind everyone why we're doing this, we had a group, multiple groups at the World Wide Web Consortium, namely the Decentralized Identifiers Working Group and the Verifiable Credentials Working Group. that attempted to register a media type with multiple structured suffixes in it. And the question was, how exactly should we interpret this? There's no RFC on how we should interpret media types that have potentially multiple structured suffixes. So this draft is trying to provide some guidance on how implementers should process or how they can process things with multiple structured suffixes on them. Since the last meeting, we have transferred the repository over to the MediaMan working group. Thank you very much, Harold, for picking that up and putting it in there. We have just refreshed the specification. Not much has changed since the last draft. Mainly, we're looking for review comments and to make a final pass over it. There are 4 issues that have been raised. Harold, would you mind clicking on that so that we can just bring these up?
Let me see. I will have to find some other way to do it because
Okay, well, then I will try and just read through for those of you that have access to the slides. Please feel free to, click through to them. The first issue was a request by Harold to add something to the security consideration section around, how could people abuse this new kind of suggestion on how you can process multiple structured suffixes. So is there a way to trick an implementation into doing something like not doing a virus scan when doing multiple structured suffix processing? So the idea here is that you have a pipeline, you feed in a media type, and that pipeline might decide to not process the entire string, the opaque value, but it might choose to just chop the last structured suffix off, like plus gzip or plus xml or plus ld plus json or something like that, and process that according to more general processing rules. And so how could we trick an implementation if we are to suggest that that's an okay way to process these things? So Harold asked for some language there. We've added it. It feels a bit contrived. The current text in the specification feels a bit contrived, but at least it's there to warn people, and we've been looking for reviewers to provide a better example. So that's issue 2. Just keeping that issue open in case somebody has a better idea of a more serious attack with this kind of processing model. The issue 3 is adding guidance around fragment processing. So if you choose to process a document not according to the entire media type, but according to just the structured suffix and the spec, how should you interpret the fragment? Because it will be different in some cases than the entire thing. And is that valid? The entire media type, and is that valid? So we need guidance on that. I would love to hear suggestions from anyone. I think what we were thinking of doing was saying it is okay to interpret a fragment according to the specification that's associated with the structured suffix. So if you've got this big media type and it ends in I don't know, plus, let's just say plus LD plus JSON, that's JSON LD thing, it isn't okay to interpret the fragment per the JSON LD specification and not per the more specific media type specification. So thoughts on that would be, fantastic. That's the text that's going to be written unless we hear a different idea there. Next issue was a review by Mark Nottingham. Thank you, Mark. I apologize for taking so long to get back to your review. But in the issue, I did try and break down the concerns that Mark raised. Many of them, good and fine concerns. I think there's a question here, and I don't know the answer to this. So again, would love to hear thoughts on this around what happens if you've got a big media type and you use a structured suffix to process it in some way. And the way the pipeline algorithm goes is you can keep lopping off structured suffixes and processing them according to the more generalized specification. But at the end of the day, sometimes what you end up with when you lop those things off is you end up with a media type that is not registered anywhere, meaning that it's like what you're left with is some meta model. It has no serialization. And what do we do in that case, right? So that's the big question. Mark Nottingham suggested that maybe what we're looking at here is a new top-level type, feels kind of top-level typey, but that creates a number of other issues. So there's a concern here. The guidance right now, or the guidance I think that's going to be written into the specification, is if you choose to lop these structured suffixes off and process them, in that order, you can keep doing that until you end up with a media type that has no registration. At that point, you don't know what to do. You can't process it, full stop, right? So I think that's the suggestion there. I have no idea if that's a terrible idea or not. I feel pretty uncomfortable with that, but I can't think of a better way to address that issue and that concern. So there's some text that needs to be written there based on Mark's review. And then I also need to know from Mark if he's okay with the other answers in there. And then finally, the last issue is from Ted Thibodeau Jr., issue number 5. And he just found a number of grammatical issues that need to be fixed and asked some questions that I think need to be clarified in the spec by just modifying spec text. So that's it for the issues. If we can go to the next slide, Harold. So what we have at this point, who's read the draft, new reviewers. We had a bunch of old reviewers. New reviewers, Mark Nottingham, Harold read it, Roberto Poli, because they're doing a plus YAML and potentially a plus LD plus YAML extension. And then Ted Thibodeau, new reviewers, they're in the issue tracker. There's probably about 2 to 3 paragraphs that need to be added to the spec based on that. We should not go to last call just yet because we have things that need to be added. But my hope is by the next IETF, we will be ready to go to last call. So I think we're going to add those paragraphs if nobody has any objections to them. We're going to ask for broader review from the DID working group and the verifiable credential working group and get some reviewers from there. And then that's it. So I think that's the plan. Those are the concerns. Any questions or concerns or suggestions on how we address some of these issues?
Daryl?
Hi, my name is Daryl Miller. It's probably more of a question here. In some of the suffix are different than other suffix, like plus JSON, plus XML is just adding another lower level layer of semantics. But then things like plus gzip are completely changing the stream of bytes. Like if you do plus LD plus gzip, or sorry, let's say you do plus JSON plus gzip, can I still use a fragment identifier for JSON? Or is that no longer valid because of the last plus gzip?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. That's where I'm really stuck. It's those kinds of edge cases that are just really difficult to write to. So one thing we could say is like, if you choose to process multiple structured suffixes in this way, all bets are off on fragment processing, right? The other thing that we can say is it's valid. So you can use a fragment in a plus JSON plus gzip thing. You ungzip it, and then if you want to apply the fragment in the JSON, then I forget what fragment processing for JSON. Is there fragment processing?
JSON pointer. Well,
JSON.
It's not registered, but people use it.
Right. Okay. So if there's fragment processing for JSON pointer and you have a JSON pointer plus gzip, if you want to apply, if you want to un-gzip it and then apply the fragment processing to the JSON pointer thing, it seems like you should be able to do that. Like that seems like a legitimate thing to do. I just don't, it's the edge cases. I don't know if that results in some kind of security compromise on some crazy combination of the structured suffixes. That's the thing that's really bothering me right now. So we could put the text in there to say, yeah, you can process it. It's your call. You can process it based on the fragment that's associated with the structured suffix. Do so at your peril, right?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
So speaking as a participant, I kind of think that gzip is an example of a reversible information preserving transform.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes sense for the gzip suffix registration to say that if you want to interpret a suffix, a fragment identifier on something that has the gzip suffix, you need to unpack it and then apply the fragment identifier. But I think that we can't make a general rule for that because if you transform something from XML to JSON, well, that probably doesn't have the same fragment identifier syntax. So you would have to rewrite the fragments too. Mm-hmm. So I think this draft needs to say that dealing with the suffixes under transformation needs to be specified as part of the transformation descriptions. Alex?
Yeah, I was to say pretty much the same. Either this or we update the registration template to have this as a separate field, right? Yeah. Which is fine, but we'll need to retroactively review what we already registered to make sure.
Clarification question. So you're saying that we should say in the spec that how you apply fragment processing needs to be specified in the document associated with the structured syntax suffix?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I'll try to put that in text on list so it's easier to deal with there.
Thanks.
Okay, so we're now got 13 minutes left of the meeting. And I think that the conclusions are clear here. More work is needed. But we seem to be on the right track. And this one does not have a dependency on any other document. So we'll ask the editors to continue editing and ask all the participants to make sure that the comments are properly filed so that the editors can find them again. By the way, I forgot, who has read the draft? Yeah. Half of us. That's good. So the last slot was added because Mark Nottingham suggested that we should open up the discussion a bit now that we have our first items almost out of the way, we wish. So we have in our charter that we are allowed to look at the registration procedures overall and say something about whether they make sense as written, whether they need to change, or whether we have a suggestion for a completely different set of procedures. So I'll open the floor to comments on registration procedures. I see Mark coming.
Hello. I think, my motivation for putting this in the charter was just the observation that it seems like a number of folks who could register their media types don't. for a variety of reasons. And some of that has to do with the friction around or uncertainty around the registration process. Some of that has to do with what we allow them to register, I think. And so the two kind of conversations that I'd like to start are around whether we can do things to the registration process to encourage and facilitate more registrations. And that might be, I proposed GitHub because we've started using GitHub issue queues for a lot of other registries, and especially ones where the audience for the registry is not just an IETF audience, it's a broader audience. And I think that's really the case for media types. And we've been using GitHub issue queues with some success in that it allows you to have one repo where there's documentation about expectations and process and things, and you can just file an issue. And now with the newer GitHub issue templates, you get quite a sophisticated form for gathering data. And it was pointed out to me, I'd forgotten, I knew about this, but I'd forgotten that IANA does have a form for media types. It's one of the places where they actually do have some infrastructure for letting people do a registration. I think the difference is that, excuse me, with the GitHub, you create an issue and then you have evidence of that issue. You can go back and check its status. You can have a conversation in the issue. And that's not true with the forum. With the forum, it's more fire and forget. And I have this, unfortunately, this is the expense of a lot of registrations, is that the registrant files something somewhere or sends an email, and then they don't really know what the status of the request is. Or what the guarantees on getting a response are. IANA is very good about meeting their SLAs, but experts often are not. And so that's one discussion to have, I think, about what we can do. I'm happy if we keep the forum. I think that's great. I would ask that we think about, whether we have the right documentation and words around the form to make that process easy, and whether we can do anything to make the results of the form processing more transparent. Or if people are willing to use GitHub as, in all the registries that I've used it for, it's a parallel process. People can still file via email. We don't want to make people use a specific tool. Right. Excuse me. Yes, technically, yeah. You need to make a request directly to IANA. You can make a request via email to the experts, or usually through some mailing list, or you can submit a GitHub issue. I think that's the typical patterns. And the IANA path is usually followed by other IETF registrations because they just suck it up when the document gets submitted. But also thinking about how can we fine-tune the text around that collection point to make it easier for people coming into the process to understand what they need to do and to set their expectations. And I would suggest that maybe one of the reasons why GitHub has been more successful is that you can iterate much more quickly with that. You can go and tweak the text, and if somebody has a question, you realize you haven't covered a point, you can go in and put it in. Whereas right now, through no fault of their own, we have to go and ask IANA to tweak the text on the page, and that's a very manual and kind of clunky process. So that's one area to investigate. The other thing that comes up for me is that right now we reserve the standards tree for things we consider standards. That's why we call it the standards tree. And we demote other efforts to, the personal or vendor trees or whatever. And that has a couple of effects. I think I originally, suggested opening up to just opening up the standards tree completely and allowing any registration there. We do that with a lot of other registries, including HTTP headers, URI schemes, link relations. There's no concept of trees in any of these. And especially when you have something go from not a proprietary use or limited use to standard use, if it does become common, then you have that awkward transition of, well, do we rename it or not? Which we tried to address with the X-Dash draft a long time ago. And I kind of see the vendor tree and the X tree, or rather with the X tree, it doesn't exist anymore except for legacy, and the personal tree as kind of other instantiations of the X tree. So that was kind of my starting point. I think in discussion, it was pointed out that maybe we should just open up somewhat and say, be more welcoming and make it clear that we're more welcoming to open source projects, for example. And maybe that's the right line, but we need to have a discussion about what's the right line for getting into the standards tree. How can we make sure that, that people who want to do the right thing and register the media types can do so. And I don't think that saying, well, because you're not a recognized standards developing organization, you have to go into this ghetto over here. That's not really an acceptable solution for the world that we live in. But we do need to maybe have some criteria. I will say that in the other registries, we put more of the work on the expert to say, well, if somebody comes along and they don't seem to have a vital, a project that's actually getting adoption, and they try and squat on a name that's, quite common and quite short, don't let them do that. Make them use a longer name that's more specific to what they're doing, so that we don't consume potentially valuable names as easily. I think, maybe discussions like that might help. But that's, I guess, the scope of what I see us discussing here.
Thank you. Speaking as participant, since I joined the queue first, the reason for making a somewhat onerous process for unprefixed names is, I think, that when we have two things that have the same name, we want to make sure that they actually have the same definition, so that we can tell whether they conform to the definition or not. And we kind of done that by requiring a stable reference, and we kind of required a stable reference by saying this reference is stable because some standards organization tells us it is. But application/MS Word was kind of undefined until fairly recently in history terms. So, but I'll give the word to Graham.
So can I, the points you made about open source projects, an observation from what happens with URI scheme registrations. One of the criteria that I've learned to apply on occasion is if a scheme is in widespread use, then this can usually be found by doing a bit of hunting out on the web, and that could be sufficient reason to allow that as a permanent registration. So it could be a similar thing that applies here. Something you were saying, the issue of two things should be referring to this, should have the same meaning if they've got the same name. I would say that's an argument for making it easier to get the name registered, so that they don't get used in the wild without getting registered.
Manu?
Yeah, I just wanted to speak in favor of what Mark was suggesting. In fact, this is exactly how we operate the decentralized identifier registry at W3C. So a plus one to making it, be driven through GitHub. That's what we do. We provide a very easy template that just about any implementer can fill out. It just has a few fields in it. It's a GitHub issue template, and when they raise that, the experts are pinged, and then we do a review, threaded review just on the issue, on the pull request itself. So on the whole, it has definitely led to more engagement from non-standards people. We have 145 of these things were registered within the course of around 2 years. So we had a massive rapid rise in registered DID methods, somewhat, synonymous. Well, they have the same kind of usage patterns as media types. So I think it's a good thing, but what we have found is we have a bunch of people that don't know anything about standards that jump in and try and register these things, and sometimes it takes an enormous amount of effort from the experts to teach people about what they need to do, right? So that's stressing out the experts, because not a week goes by before we have to teach these folks like what it means to have a decent spec and a stable reference and all that kind of stuff. And even if we give them something to go and read, they don't read it, right? So that takes that's an increased stressor. The other thing that we've seen is an increased squatting, for lack of a better term. People seem to, because we made it so easy, it's really easy for someone to go in and try and squat in a namespace, and then we ended up spending, I mean, and it's still going on. The registration procedures, we're having to keep changing because people keep trying to game it because there's so many more people that are, attempting to do this. So I think the upsides certainly outweigh the downsides, but you have to be ready for the downsides if you adopt such a system. They are manageable. It's just more work for the experts, and it's good to know that going in to the process.
So we're now over time. So I'm going to lock the queue in a few seconds, and we'll please be short.
Alexei, so in regards to GitHub, I mean, let's try it and see. We don't actually need to change any documents for this to try it out. And if it's successful, then, well, we can document it after the fact. In regards to SDO, I think my preferred short-term fix is to expand the list and say that recognized open source projects should be treated the same. For this, we'll need to write an RFC, I think. Like as I said on the mailing list, I don't have problems with somebody like Debian registering. They're actually using vendor-specific media types just fine, but I don't have a mental problem with them being considered SDO, for example. So, or Gen2. Yeah, I think.
Darrell Miller. Just one of the impacts of the onerous process is in the HTTP API space, most people just don't bother. They send application/JSON. Most devs don't even know what content type is for because the only thing they've ever seen there is application/JSON. I've been being harassed for 4 years now to go and register the Open API media type. And we haven't because we didn't have a stable organization despite its widespread use. So it does have negative impacts, I believe, and positive impacts, but there are some negative ones.
Thank you. Mark?
I think what we might be talking about is giving the experts a bit more discretion as well as guidelines about who they admit into the standards tree. Guidelines are necessary, but discretion is going to be necessary as well, because if we just say open source, well, I can create an open source project in about 20 seconds. That's no barrier. And so you need to have some qualifications. You need, and it's going to require judgment. There's an appeal process there, so I'm not too worried about that. They can always appeal to the ADs if they feel like the expert gets it wrong. But we're going to need to be comfortable allowing the experts to make those sorts of decisions. And we might put in guidance. It might be that the bar is considerably lowered if you prefix your name not with VND or PRS, but with Microsoft dot or something. So that it is in a namespace, or maybe not a dot because that would conflict with trees. But sorry. Yes. So I retract the dot. But if this is what we do often with HTTP headers, is we say, you're doing this application. This is specific to your application, so prefix it with your application name so that we don't worry about conflicting with anybody else's use, and everybody's clear about what's happening here. We can talk about that as well.
So Graham gets the last word.
So the issue about registrations being onerous is in tension with the issue of wanting to get people to register stuff that they're actually doing in real life. And this was behind the structure we introduced for message headers and URI schemes, which allows a provisional registration, which has got very light touch entry requirements, but doesn't have the full status and doesn't have the same level of expectation that it's there forever, and then the permanent registration, which elevates it to something closer to a standard or recommendation level.
Thank you. And now we are over time, so I'll ask, do we have anyone who wants to volunteer to write up a note or something about? Yeah, Mark is volunteering. Yeah. So he's going to write something that we can, in the form of an ID or in the form of something else that we can then criticize and file bugs on and do pull requests on, right? Okay.
I can co-volunteer.
Okay, Mark and
We choose crayon on rock.
I prefer chalk. It washes off more easily. Okay. And then I should say thank you all for coming, and we'll meet again online. We'll continue working on the drafts, and we might get some last calls out before the next IETF. If not, we'll be back here. See you again.
When you request a status in 80 degree, it's an unpleasant situation. Very interesting because if anyone's being